All right, let's move on to the reigning conference champion. It's not TCU. People might get that mistaken. It's Kansas State under Chris Kleiman, 10-4 for the Wildcats in 2022, 7-2 in conference. A Big 12 championship for the Wildcats. They beat TCU last season. They did take a pretty big L in the Sugar Bowl to Alabama. You get Will Howard back after he kind of took the job from Adrian Martinez midway through last season. You do lose your leading rusher, Deuce Vaughn, an All-American, over 1,500 yards last year. You do lose your leading wide receiver, Malik Knowles. You lose a first-round draft pick off the defense. You lose a second-round defensive back off the defense. So an interesting year for Chris Kleiman. Lucas and I have had the conversation about, can you sustain it? Right? We've seen some flash-in-the-pans years from teams that have won 10 or 11 games. They've won a conference championship or a division. And then they fall back down to earth. They go 7-5 or 8-4 next year. Kansas State has just been rock solid. It's been a rock solid program in this conference for seemingly decades, right? Under Bill Snyder, you had kind of some down years under Ron Prince, and then they get back with Chris Kleiman. Lucas, your thoughts on the Wildcats here entering 2023?
I actually like Kansas State quite a bit. I think the fact that injury luck kind of worked in their favor. Obviously, Adrian Martinez started the year at quarterback. Will Howard, who had played a little bit the previous years, did not impress. He comes in when Adrian Martinez gets hurt, and Will Howard looks like a completely different quarterback, and this offense was much different when he took over. And the fact that he had that experience and now he's coming back, he's going to have one of the best offensive lines in college football, led by their All-American left guard, Cooper Beebe. I believe they had at least 4 starters come back from last year's team. Now, the biggest question mark, like you mentioned, they don't have Deuce Vaughn anymore, who I felt like was at Kansas State for the past 6 or 7 seasons. Just one of those guys who was just always productive. But they did bring in Treshaun Ward from Florida State. He was very productive for them last year. Going to be more of a running back by committee. And I just think, they're going to figure it out, in my opinion, on defense. Since Kleiman's gotten there, they've always been really, really solid. They were a top 30 scoring defense last year. So I think even if maybe they backtrack a little bit on defense, I think that the offense, even without Deuce Vaughn, I think has a chance to be better than what they were a year ago.
Yeah, just a solid program. Lucas mentioned the offensive line. 119 combined starts back for Kansas State. Finished top 30 in scoring defense, 64th in total defense. Also a top 50 total offense, a top 15 rushing offense for Kansas State. One thing to note, early bye week for Kansas State. They have a week 3 bye week. So, a week 3 bye week.
It's week 5, isn't it?
Week 5, thank you.
Yeah.
Sorry. So they will play, 7 straight games. So a little earlier than you would hope. All right, the over-under at FanDuel is 7.5 wins. The over is -180. The under is +146. The schedule for the Wildcats in the non-conference, they'll host Southeast Missouri. They'll host Troy. They'll go at Missouri. In conference, the home games are UCF, TCU, Houston, Baylor, and Iowa State. So 5 home games for the Wildcats in the Big 12. On the road at OK State, Oklahoma State, Texas Tech, Texas, and Kansas. So some tricky road games. Oklahoma State, Texas Tech, Texas, and Kansas. The over or under is at 7.5. Lucas, what is your prediction?
I'm going over for Kansas State. Now, I am a little bit worried with them, a little bit on the back end. I think they had 3 guys from their secondary picked in the NFL draft this year, so it will be tough to replace that. But if they can kind of be a decent back there, I do think this is, at worst, probably an 8-win team. You mentioned that the non-conference I don't think is too scary. Yes, they have to go on the road at Missouri, but that might be a game where they're actually favored at. And then they don't get Oklahoma on the schedule. They don't have to travel, way out west to either BYU. I don't even believe they don't even go out to West Virginia. So they're pretty centrally located from a scheduling perspective. I guess maybe the one word I might have is you were talking about that early bye week at week 5. Do they start to maybe lose gas towards the end, especially in November when you have to go at Texas, first Baylor, at Kansas, and finish up against Iowa State? Do you start to lose gas maybe there in November? But I think Chris Kleiman has got this program on an upwards trajectory, and I just think this year 8-4 for me is kind of the floor for this team. So I'm going over 7.5.
Yeah, we're 3 for 3 in agreement. I'm over as well. I think this is one of those programs that you just expect at least 7 wins every year. I mean, I think 6-6, 5-7. It's not really in the cards for Kansas State. Year in and year out, they're extremely solid. You mentioned Trayshawn Ward. They also brought in Iowa's top wide receiver Keegan Johnson. You bring back slot receiver Phillip Brooks, who had 45 catches last year. A lot back on the offensive line, and K-State's one of those programs, right? It's almost like the opposite of Texas, where Texas you bet the over, you feel like you're hanging on for dear life. Kansas State, you bet the over, you just feel confident. 8-4, 9-3. I'm not going to predict another conference championship game appearance. I don't quite know if the ceiling's there, but I think 8-4 is more likely than 7-5. Although, like you said, road games kind of tricky, especially in the month of November. All right, let's get to the